Now, some of you are going to think this is a bit of a cop-out, but I'm not going to be covering the reign of the Targaryens very extensively in this video. It's going to be covered really thoroughly in episode 3, so if you'd like to know how Aegon actually conquered Westeros and how his descendants ruled over it, stick around and catch episode 3. Because I'm not going to go into too much detail here, let me at least give you a basic summary of how it all went down. So like I said before, the Targaryens, along with the Velaryons and Celticars, stayed on their islands in Blackwater Bay for about 114 years after the doom of Valyria, before Aegon actually crossed the bay to take over the continent. During that time, they still traded with their fellow surviving Velaryons and even made inroads with the noble houses of Westeros, making friends and trading with them. But it wasn't until Aegon I that they actually wanted to rule the continent. Aegon I and his sisters Rhaenys and Visenya, along with their bastard half-brother Orys Baratheon and their 3 dragons, led a relatively small host of warriors that managed to take out most of the continent. As you might imagine, the dragons were a huge help to the Targaryens' fight to conquer Westeros. And as I've said before, it's really kind of hard to fight fire with a sword. And the Targaryen conquest saw the fall of House Hoare of the Iron Islands and House Gardner of the Reach. These noble families opposed Aegon's army and once defeated were replaced by the Greyjoys and the Tyrells respectively. The Riverlands, once ruled by the Ironborn House Hoare, were now given to House Tully, and Riverrun was built afterwards. The old Ironborn castle of Harrenhal was destroyed in the process. Given that the Starks of the North, the Arryns of the Vale, and the Lannisters of the Westerlands had more or less surrendered to Aegon I before engaging in extensive bloody conflicts, those families got to keep their lands, and they were changed from kings of those regions to lords paramount of those respective regions. The one exception to this situation was the Stormlands, where Argella, the daughter of the Storm King Argilac, was married off to Aegon's bastard brother Orys Baratheon. And that is how House Baratheon got started, and it is also the reason why they can claim royal blood and a right to the Iron Throne if the Targaryens ever fell out of power. When Orys and Argella got married, Orys Baratheon took Argella's family crest or sigil, which is a black stag on a golden field, and he also took on her family's house motto, which was "Ours is the Fury." Over the course of 2 years, the Targaryens and their allies fight against all the various kings of the 7 kingdoms before they're finally successful. Oh, and I forgot to mention, they didn't actually win over Dorne in that first conquest. Dorne was way too badass to be conquered, even with dragons. Well, except this one time, like 160 years after Aegon I, when one of the later Targaryen kings, Daeron I, actually successfully conquered Dorne. It didn't take, mind you, the Dornish rebelled like immediately right after, and they kicked the Targaryens out. But it is important to note that the Dornish only really decided to join the rest of the realm when they married into the Targaryen family, and the Martells are able to hold on to their titles of princes and princesses of Dorne rather than being reduced to lord paramounts like the Starks or the Lannisters had been. The other important aspect of the Targaryen dynasty is that whole being connected to dragons psychically or bloodline-wise somehow thing. So when the Targaryens came to Westeros, they had a handful of live dragons and a horde of unhatched dragon eggs. By the year 129 AC, so that is 129 years after Aegon I, the Targaryens had 20 full-grown dragons. However, by that point, there was also a lot of infighting with the family. This fighting spills into full-blown civil war a few times throughout the history of the Targaryen dynasty. Through these bloody conflicts and uprisings, all the dragons are killed. There were 2 major Targaryen family conflicts before Robert's Rebellion. The first was called the Dance of the Dragons, and it was followed by the protracted Blackfyre Rebellions. And there were actually 5 of these Blackfire rebellions in total. Again, we'll be covering this stuff pretty extensively in episode 3, so I'm not going to go over all the details right here. I will say this though, by the year 153 AC, all the dragons had died, and for whatever reason, the Targaryens simply could not hatch anymore. Sure, they had eggs, but no matter what they tried to do, none of these eggs hatched. And trust me, they tried all kinds of crazy ass stuff to force their eggs to hatch. Nothing took. All of these attempts always ended in either failure or tragedy or both. Even without their dragons though, and despite all the fighting, the Targaryens were still able to hold on to power for at least another 130 years before things began to completely unravel. As we've all learned from both the books and the TV show, the last of the official Targaryen kings was Daenerys' father, the Mad King, Aerys. Now, some of you non-book readers might have been paying close attention to the hints and details dropped throughout the show about this time period. Others of you might have been a little bit overwhelmed by the crazy adventure that our current protagonists are on, and you may have missed these details. Either way, you're going to need a complete look at what went down in this time period to get what's really going on in our current storyline. Well, that's what I'm here for. Let's unpack the fall of the Targaryens together.